welcome you, Kofi. It's so nice to have you with us. For those of you who are not familiar with him, let me give you a little short biography as we get the picture set up and the slide set up and totally organized. But Dr. Marfo has a wonderful and varied background. He has pursued a 42-year career in 6 universities, including Aga Khan University, the University of South Florida, Kent State, Memorial University of Newfoundland, University of Alberta, University of Cape Coast, Ghana. I feel a little boring. I've only been at 2 universities, so I visited a few. His scholarly interests include developmental science and childhood interventions, advancements of a global field of human development, and philosophical issues in behavioral science and education research. He has published extensively on early child development, childhood disability, early intervention efficacy, parent-child interaction, and behavioral development in children adopted into North America from China. He was a co-convener of an invitational conference on strengthening child development research in Africa that culminated in the publication of 6 articles on the subject in Child Development Perspectives in 2011. With Alan Pence, Robert Serpel, Bami Nsambe, he facilitated the American Scholars Workshop initiative to enhance research capacity in Africa. With others, he facilitated the launch of a research mentorship program under the auspices of Africa Early Childhood Network. And under his leadership, the Institute of Human Development at Aga Khan University launched pre- and postdoctoral training initiatives to prepare future generations of researchers. He has been a residential fellow at the Center for the Advanced Studies in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford, at the U.S. National Academy of Education's Spencer Fellow. He has been a Spencer Fellow, a member of the Biobehavioral and Behavioral Sciences Subcommittee of the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, and a member of the Governing Council of the Society for Research in Child Development. Basically, he has made enormous contributions to our understanding of childhood and education around the world, and he has particularly been helpful in making the rest of us aware of issues and development in Africa and helping in the development of African scholars and capacity building in Africa. So welcome, Kofi. Are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but we can't see you.
Oh, and I'm even sharing my slide. So what's, okay, let me go back and see.
You can do both. You can share slides and you.
Yeah. Chances are I haven't, let's see.
Just click on the start video button.
Let me come back here. How do I make this big? And I was very ready for this. Let's see. I'm sharing the screen.
That's
now I see. Now I see. Okay, I see the video. Okay.
Oh, there you are. Wonderful.
You can see me now. Okay.
Yes,
wonderful.
I can. And put your screen back on presentation mode so we don't see the.
Back on presentation mode. Okay.
Yeah. Is that what you call it?
Always
Yeah.
got it. Oh yeah, hit F5 or full screen in your. Yeah, there you go. Great.
Okay. And
Does that
I will
work?
go away so as not to be distracting. And I thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much, and I truly appreciate the opportunity to be part of this and the resilience that ISSBD has shown and the planners of this conference. We talked about resilience the very first day, and I think you should all feel very proud that we have not let this pandemic get in the way of sharing science. It's a significant tribute, to our society that we've been able to move forward, and I'm hoping that the thoughts we have to share together, I benefited a lot from the first day of participation, will be shared widely. Let me take this opportunity, because I missed an important number of meetings, to honor a number of colleagues, but beginning with Bami Nsambe. who has already been celebrated by ISSBD. But in many ways, I find it befitting to dedicate a big chunk of my remarks to the memory of Bani, because he's been such a wonderful leader in our field and has been very pivotal in advancing developmental research on the continent of Africa, working mostly through ISSBD, but also with other international research organizations. We certainly miss Bani, but his work will forever be with us. I also want to recognize my good friends, Professor Robert Serpel of the University of Zambia, who has equally been a champion of developmental research, one of our foremost mentors, somebody dedicated and committed to really making research on the continent of Africa and the majority world in general a very important agenda for professional organizations. Similarly to Alan Pence, who has worked with us over the past maybe 20, 25 years. And some of what I've come to contribute have both fed into some of the work we did together and also benefited, from that work. To my colleagues, leadership of ISSBD and SRCD, as an African scholar who has lived across multiple parts of the world, Canada, the United States, Kenya, in some ways Pakistan, and now back to Africa. I cannot thank you enough for the dedication you continue to make to the advancement of research on the continent of Africa and in majority world as a whole. So I may not be able to go through all the names, but I want you to understand how good I feel every time I think about ISSBD, SRCD, and other organizations that have made capacity development a significant part of the agenda. I want to begin my remarks with a few thoughts. Now, why working towards a global field of developmental science matters for us? And I think we all know that the current times present us with compelling reasons for our field to accelerate its trajectory towards a truly global field. We really need to be thinking about building strong foundations for the developmental and health well-being of children in the earliest years of life. These are pressing issues in our part of the world. And we should be responding to the needs and aspirations and resilience potential of marginalized children, families, and communities all over the world. And I think we need to appreciate the vulnerability of even so-called advanced economies to crises such as COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic. I think those of us who care to really pay attention to what is happening, not just to Europe, but especially to the United States, can only walk away with a sense of the need to develop a level of modesty that allows us to look critically at ourselves, even when in our own minds, we are ahead of everybody else. And developmental researchers, I think, have a challenge, especially given what we're going through today. We need to come to terms with a thin line between what I consider to be superpower status and even failed state status, as we witness the profound social upheaval in the US and other countries that are driven by populist leadership. And I do not intend to be political here, but I grew up in a culture where you call a spade and not a big spoon. I think one critical thing is, as we navigate a world in which technological advances in information sharing are expanding the reaches of knowledge, but at the same time, flagging what I consider to be the potential demise of knowledge as we know it. Because it is becoming increasingly difficult for large segments of our populations, wherever they live, regardless of their country of citizenship and residency, to tell true or factual information from fake or fabricated information. These are challenges of our times. And they really are not just social cultural challenges. They are challenges that emanate deeply from the moral, ethical wrongs of our humanity. And unless researchers can understand and put themselves in the shoes of individuals who are going through turmoil, we might not be able to pose the research questions and engage in the research enterprises that might become part of the solution that I think about when I think of how our science can become a part of the process of building a society that is pluralistic, a society that understands diversity, and a society that realizes that actually we build unity out of our diversity. Now, this means that we need to socialize our up and coming scholars to understand that if our field is to serve humanity fully, it must learn to deal with complexity, and it must be awake to the imperative to be a catalyst to the building of pluralistic global community, defined by its ability to find the ingredients to unify and harmonize out of our diversity. And that is that last point. With that last point, I want to move on to why I think we need to really look critically at our field. And I want to start from analytic work that is going on in our own field. Many of us are citing the work of our colleague, the name is escaping me now, Jeffrey Arnett's work. Jeffrey Arnett's work, they just produced another paper following up on the paper he published in 2008, in which he analyzed 6 flagship journals in the United States, or the 6 flagship journals in multiple fields within psychology. And I'm going to show my attempt to try to summarize the information from this work, from the first paper, 2008, and from the one that is just now being published. I only have the manuscript version. Chances are it's already been released in American Psychologist. That phrase, when he drew our attention to the missing or underprivileged or unattended to 95% of the global population of children who do not live in North America, who live in the majority world. And yet much of what we know about child development is based on research that is predominantly framed, conducted, and reported from American context. I think one can take a look at the most recent paper and maybe even claim or suggest, as Arnett and his colleagues have done, that the slight change, the slight drop in the what I call Euro-American samples from 68% or so to 62% should be celebrated. But the reality is that large numbers of our world population remain untouched by our research. One of the things I want to draw attention to, and I'll do so by taking a look at one analysis they did on one of the 6 journals. That's the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. And in that journal, they looked at not just samples being American-centered, but actually who in the United States are participants in much of this research on personality and social psychology. And in the 2008 analysis, about 67% of the samples were college students. Now, it was 80% in other parts of the world. And in the current analysis, the college student population has dropped to 39% and 54% in other parts of the world. But I raise this issue to draw attention to a point that is often missed. And in part because I straddle multiple worlds, I always try to begin my conversations about diversity and recognizing the significance of global perspectives, not by going straight forward to compare a Euro-American world with the majority world, but actually by pointing out that even within American society, if you look at the reality that a lot of research on personality development is carried out on college student populations, it doesn't take much to infer that even within the American context, the research might not be generalizable. And if it's not in the North American context, then of course it is very obvious that as we try to do things with what we think we know in other parts of the world, we need to be humble and we need to be courageous in admitting to the limits, of that knowledge. So that takes me to the central issue of generalizability, the role of generalizability, in the work we do. I think we need to look at research in ways that enable us to cut through the either-or perspectives that often have sort of bogged us down. So I think whatever the geographical context or the cultural context within which we consider building a field to advance global developmental knowledge, we should be guided by a principle that I have mentioned many times now. But basically, it suggests that the field should be conceived not as culturally insulated enterprise cocooned in its own traditions and designed exclusively to address questions of local relevance, but one that is mindful enough of the interconnectedness of the human condition across cultures to be able to benefit from and contribute to other understandings. I'm very mindful of time. This is a point I would have liked to elaborate on, because I think very often we get tangled up in what we get from research that only looks at local context and research that only looks at a global context. I think our goal as a field should be to foster the kind of inquiry and to socialize up-and-coming scholars to think about research in whatever context as research that accomplishes both things, understanding the local, but also understanding how the local might be similar to and different from others. And I think we have to be concerned about how research located in different cultures helps us to make that distinction as much as possible. What I want to do now, because my topic is on research capacity building, and I realize that I took on so much, I probably should have defined it narrowly, but I'm going to try to do the impossible. I want to share a few things that should make us feel very good about how far we've come, and especially for ISSBD, how ISSBD has been spearheading the move towards building a global field of human development. I have a list that I'm going to go through quickly, and then I'll try to visit each of them very, very quickly. So on the continent of Africa, as in other parts of the world, there have been councils on the development of social science research. And in the case of Africa, it's CODESRIA. That is an example of advances or support for capacity building that is driven by an independent research entity, of course, funded through external donors. We have in ISSBD a wonderful example of programs that are sponsored by international research organizations that are aimed at advancing research capacity development around the world. More recently, through the work of Hiro Yoshikawa and his associates at NYU, we can think of the Equal Ties initiative that has actually culminated in the funding of individual early career scholars on the continent of Africa and elsewhere in the Middle East and now Asia, as a good example of initiatives that are led by individual teams of researchers or scholars who collaborate with colleagues around the world. On the African continent, we have in Africa, the African Early Childhood Network, a research fellowship, which is an exemplar in my mind for programs that are initiated by civil society, regional professional organizational networks. And then I want to talk about university-based initiatives. And I would start with the Department of Science and Innovation, National Research Foundation, Centers of Excellence in South Africa. And one of the 15 or so, I hope I'm right, one of the 15 or so centers is the Center on Human Development, which was directed by Dr. Richter for many years. Actually, she was the founding director. And I had the opportunity to be part of the advisory group. So I'll come to that and say a little bit about why initiatives of that nature are important. And then I will talk briefly about what we've tried to do at Aga Khan University through generous funding from the Conrad and Hilton Foundation and the Aga Khan Foundation, and how the kinds of fellowships that we've conceived, might become part of the journey towards building capacity on the continent. So let's start with Codesria. Now, Codesria, I'm going to just quickly refer to a few key points. It's founded in 1973. Since the late 1970s, has had a small grants program to support thesis and dissertation writing on the continent. The beneficiaries have participated in regional methodological workshops for many years. And actually, for a period of time, there was even a summer school in quantitative methods. They've had an advanced research fellowship program that is open to all scholars in the areas of science, the social sciences and humanities. And the funding at some point was about $10,000 or so. I hope it's bigger now. And this initiative has spawned North-South and South-South collaborations and mentorship activities that are benefiting many African scholars. Then ISSBD, I don't need to spend so much time on ISSBD because this is home turf. And we know the contributions that ISSBD has made in the area of research capacity development. The early scholars who are the primary beneficiaries of these initiatives, and the number of workshops that have been held around the world. But I focus here in particular using the African example. And on that table, you see, beginning from 1992, the workshops that have been held across the continent. And international mentoring is a key component of this, building on the contributions and utilizing the contributions of colleagues in the North who have made a commitment to be part of the solution to the challenge of African research capacity. And the use of jury awards for posters, I think after maybe between the Maseno and Lusaka conferences, a very innovative way of motivating our young scholars to take their research very seriously and to submit posters for adjudication, and in the process, be able to present those papers at ISSBD. Supported with travel grants. And here, I don't want to leave anybody out, but I'd like to say thank you to Jacobs Foundation and other foundations that have been supporting these initiatives. And actually for the latest initiative, which is not here yet, the West Africa project, the Francophone initiative that Toni and Frozo are all a part of. And there has been an evaluation report on this contribution of ISSBD already released in our bulletin. So let me now take two examples of initiatives that are actually spearheaded by scholars, individual scholars. And the first one I want to talk about is the African Scholars Initiative. The table that you see there will be very difficult to read, but I use it to just point to the reality that where we are in terms of our focus on research began with a much larger vision of building the field of early child development on the continent of Africa. And Alan Pence and many other colleagues, I've mentioned Bami, I've mentioned my colleague Robert Seppo, Robert may not have been involved in the early stages of the conference series, but it began with a conference series. And unfortunately, it sort of tapered off after 2009. But that brought a lot of people together to begin to think about the next steps of moving the continent of Africa forward. So in 2008, Alan, myself, and Robert, Bami, and colleagues at Harvard and the University of Connecticut came together to propose the Strengthening Child Development Research in Africa. And what you see on the screen now are 6 publications that came out of the special invitational conference that was held in Victoria, ironically, trying to decolonization of research by holding a conference in Victoria of all places, and a hotel that I believe was called Empress Hotel, something like that. Anyway. So, but more importantly, as a result of that initiative, we grew the Scholars Workshop series, which began in 2010 and went on, took place in Lusaka and Johannesburg, Lusaka again, Dar es Salaam, and in Abidjan. Now, I don't chronicle the number of people who benefited from this, but one of the really delightful things about this work is how many young scholars you come across who have benefited from any one of the initiatives that I'm talking about. Now to the Equal Initiative, which is funded initially by the Ford Foundation and the Catalyst Trust. And in particular, Hero and his colleagues have teamed up with institutions and networks in Africa and Asia to try to leverage this funding to support research capacity building by awarding small grants to early career scholars who are mentored by senior faculty, across the continent and in the North as well. And through those collaborations, they've been convening meetings that allow these young scholars to come together and build networks of their own. The chart you see here is, I share it, it's taken from Hero, but I share it to show how it's a much broader sort of initiative. It's not just Africa. So the goal is to have these regional networks in West Africa, East Africa, the MENA region, and then South Asia. And at the heart of it is the goal of helping to build technical assistance, coordinating communication, and providing quality assurance, especially in the direction of enhancing quality and evaluation of programs in the majority world. One of the exciting things in capacity building is that a network as young as the Africa Early Childhood Network, which is not primarily a research entity, actually has made research capacity building one of its 5 strategic goals. And through the support of colleagues throughout the continent, we've been able to develop a fellowship program that allows fellows to work with mentors, senior research mentors, both within and outside the continent. And a unique attribute of that program is we also invite community-based implementation partners, mostly NGOs that are already delivering services in the field, so that our scholars can have a reality check, be part of what is going on the ground. And so each one of them is supposed to develop a relationship with an agency and at least spend 1 day a week doing work with and for the agency, and in the process acquiring research skills. The research stipends that are provided here are obviously very small, but actually that's not the most important part. The most important part is that we are even able to take this on as a young organization. And working with other entities such as the Equal Initiative to convene meetings that are now bringing together cohorts of early career scholars who have benefited from different types of capacity building programs around the continent. So let me say a little bit about the Center of Excellence in Human Development. It's a different type of contribution, but nevertheless a very important one. For those of you who are familiar with the South African Centers of Excellence, these are funded nationally, and they are not brick and mortar institutions. They are virtual entities that coordinate collaboration across the country and bring experts, researchers together to help improve, enhance the quality of research, address important critical issues that remain gaps in our knowledge. But in the process, the program also awards bursaries to graduate students, fellowships to graduate students who then work with seasoned researchers, and in the process get direct experiences, from that relationship. And my hope is that we would have more South Africans like that in other parts of our world, where governments will really think seriously about building the infrastructure for research, including the capacity base that we need to advance important research, on the continent and in the majority world, as a whole. I will say a little bit about the Conrad and Hilton Foundation project. For 6 years, while I was director of the Institute, we were lucky to have a relationship with the Hilton Foundation that actually was formulated mostly around providing support for community-based programs. So we've been using the Science of Early Child Development program as the knowledge tool for developing competence and expertise and technical knowledge for individuals who work in community-based programs serving the needs of children affected by HIV and AIDS. So we worked with the foundation to build into this more practical applied work, a postdoctoral research fellowship program that expanded into a fellowship that included pre-doctoral students as well. And in the process, we've been able to put about 5 or so students, I think, who've gone through the program. Some of them are back, with their own universities, public universities, which is another wonderful thing about the initiative. But more importantly, we worked through this in such a way that we could provide a research stipend in addition to the typical stipend that you give to students, a salary. And then they are able to undertake an independent research project, which is supported by faculty. I think those are repetitions, so I will go. So what new directions do I see? What I've tried to capture so far are examples of what a good job a lot of us are doing, trying to really address the need for capacity building. And what I want to turn to next is what are the new directions that I see. And in the interest of time, I'm going to skip a lot of what I would love to say. And what you see on the screen is what I call a box turned upside down so we can see the bottom. And what I mean with that metaphor is that a lot of our initiatives on research capacity building really realistically and importantly respond to very important issues of infrastructural limitations, funding limitations, the challenges in getting good work published when you're working in a majority world country. The reality is that our nations continue to lose some of the best researchers to other parts of the world where they can be better sort of motivated. These are problems that we all know about. And I think the foundations and the basis for creating capacity building programs is exactly that. That the stark reality that our institutions are not well supported for research, and therefore we need to do more beyond what our universities are able to do. Now, a fair bit of our thinking is driven by our colonial past. And so what you see on the left side of the box is what, if I had time, I would talk about as one of the impediments to doing research that actually moves us forward, is that we sort of caught in traditions that were inherited and probably not analytically examined. And therefore, sometimes we do research because that kind of research is what everybody does everywhere. And our institutions themselves, by virtue of the traditions they've inherited, sometimes get in the way of progress, get in the way of creative thinking, and looking at how to direct and guide up-and-coming researchers to look at issues that are not easy to design research on, but issues that require research on. How do we get away from formulaic research proposals that can be easily written and data gathered, but then once data are gathered and analyzed, sometimes you're left wondering, what does it all mean? Now, this is not to sort of insult any of us that our work is not important. We do very important work. But I think you also find that in places where research capacity is not well developed, and given the nature of the demands of our institutions, sometimes we emphasize publication so much that a lot of our young ones are struggling, to do something to get published. And the more difficult questions are never answered because it takes forever to do such kind of research. So I want to concentrate on what I consider to be the missing piece in a lot of our thinking and a lot of our work. And that missing piece is summarized on that bottom, what I call the paradigmatic issues. And having had my own training in North America, I hope there wouldn't be many people who would sort of agree with my sentiment that actually a fair bit of our research is training, research training is training in the technical skills of conducting and reporting, analyzing and reporting research. There are not many programs that really spend a lot of the research curriculum on dealing with the philosophical, epistemological, what I call paradigmatic issues that should shape what we consider to be a researchable issue and why we do it and how we do it. And I want to spend the remaining time to emphasize this as the important direction that we all need to be really looking at very seriously. And that is, we need to find a way through our mentorship programs, through our formal graduate programs, to ensure that we're not just teaching technical skills. They are very important. We need our methodology workshops. We need the cutting edge tools that are being discovered, day in and day out, and we need to expose our students to them. But we also need to expose them to critical thinking about some of the assumptions that drive what we consider to be inquiry, that drive what we consider to be knowledge. What exactly is knowledge, and whose knowledge matters? These are deep philosophical issues that I think, in my mind, we are not touching enough. And that's where I want to sort of spend the last few minutes, and hope that actually, rather than talk and talk, that I'll be able to invite a conversation about how we go about adding to what we've been able to build so far by making sure that we are preparing our early career scholars to be thinkers, to be field builders. To build a field, we need to be able to understand the populations within which we are building the field. We need to understand the global context in which our individual cultures and countries are located. We need to understand what drove the kinds of research questions and the kind of knowledge base that we have all become used to. One of the things I did right from the beginning is to point out how some of the challenges with the existing research knowledge bases, that sometimes we're driving programs, developing programs, implementing programs based on findings that do not do any harm. But actually, if we were to look very closely and critically, we would think twice about what needs to modify, what needs to change before we apply whatever we know from wherever we know it from, to intervention programs. If I have time, I will probably comment briefly on some of the new developments in international comparative work, which is very, very welcome. But again, we need to understand that if that comparative research becomes solely driven by tools we have in our toolbox already, then we miss the point about cultural variation and contextual diversity. So we may have tools, the language may be simple, we can translate it, but to what extent are the constructs matchable within the context in which we are using them? And to what extent do people understand those constructs in the same ways that their own cultural traditions and practices sort of require them, to think? In other words, how do we move research from a formulaic technical thing to a very deep problem-solving oriented enterprise that requires that we understand very deeply the context in which we do our work? So I'd like to invite comments on that issue. I also want to take this opportunity to raise a number of questions for all of us to think about. I mentioned earlier on how we are blessed with technology and information sharing tools to be able to change past information on very, very easily. Well, the challenge now is what passes for good information or good knowledge and what passes for bad knowledge. When you decide an early career faculty member is trying to get work published, let's think about the temptation of falling into the hands of the 1,001 journals that are predatory journals out there that many of our early career scholars are not aware about. They need to publish, and so these are the sources they go to. I'm trying to distinguish between true predatory journals that really are almost obnoxiously sort of, in many ways, sabotaging science from journal bases that are online. The fact that they are online doesn't mean they are predatory. We need to make that distinction very clearly. But I have seen too many of the scholars I have worked with get papers accepted for presentation in conferences, almost get ready to go, and then I realize, oh no, you cannot go to this one, because it's a conference that has been advertised as a conference on developmental psychology. But you take a look at the session program, and you find everything from engineering to everything packed into one place. And here is an entity that is making a lot of money by bringing so many people together in one place to present papers that may not be interconnected in any way with one another. These are critical issues for our field to look at as we begin to think about our young early career scholars. How do we guide them through that territory, what I consider to be a very, very tricky terrain on the route to scholarship? Another issue is how, even in the best of our efforts to support our early career scholars, what are the challenges we face as mentors? And I'll be the first to admit that it has been easier for me to be part of initiatives creating these programs than actually spending time providing the mentoring to the students who are assigned to me. And that's a reality. Some scholars do a wonderful job, but actually in many ways, you have a few scholars who are being chased for the same kinds of things. And sometimes the easier part of our initiatives are setting them up, enrolling our early career scholars. The difficult part becomes how we stick with them and make sure that we are hands-on and we are there with them and continue to move them along. That's a challenge we need to find a solution to. I think I'm going to pause. I'm looking at my time here. For once, I'm being cautious of time. Yeah. Yes. So let me pause here in the hope that as questions are raised, I can capitalize on them, to address some of the other issues. But to summarize, what I've tried to do is to paint a picture of our field's understanding of the significance of research capacity building in parts of the world that lack such capacity. And I give us a lot of marks for what we've been able to accomplish. My question now is, how do we build on those efforts? And how do we, in particular, actually address one of the biggest missing links, which is the philosophical and epistemological foundations of knowledge, and how our own understandings of our cultures enable us to become better researchers, and then dealing with the practical issues of having made a commitment to support a scholar. How do you get it done? Thank you.
Thank you, Kofi. That was very helpful, and I think addresses some very basic issues that we need to address. I'm not sure I said this at the beginning of your talk, so for people who just joined us, You have the opportunity to ask a question through the chat box, and then I will convey them to Dr. Marfo. I would like to just say that, to build on what you've said, that one of the things that I am increasingly impressed with is our need to share with other behavioral development scientists the ways in which we can contribute to pressing issues of the world. You spoke to the notion of redefining our science in a more global way, and I think that's critically important. We have an enormous bias in terms of Western culture, and I think besides all the problems of not addressing all the needs of everyone, I think it also limits our knowledge, because then we think the way that it's done in one culture is the only way, is the right way. Robert Serpell's recent article on this in Child Development Perspectives on education and how children learn, and using Western society measures of successful education, of how it's done, is a great example. Because, I mean, you think about it, some of the ways in which things are done in Western cultures just don't translate. They're just not important. I mean, and that's true of, it's not only true of like enormously geographically disparate places, but it's true within cultures. So, you know, you take the United States, the North and the South are very different. Rural and urban are very different. You know, if you live in New York City, you don't live in the same world as if you live in South Dakota. And I think we underestimate, we under clarify that point. We estimate how well people understand how critically important it is. So, for example, in what Robert was talking about in his article, everybody wants to learn certain basics. Perhaps it's reading, which one could even argue how important that is. But let's say reading. But how you learn it can critically change and be different and be differentially successful depending on how that message or how the lesson is delivered. I remember in my own childhood, there was a big revolution about, we all had these Dick and Jane readers, and Dick and Jane, white kids who lived out in, I don't know, the country somewhere with a white picket fence and a green lawn. I grew up in New York City. I mean, we didn't have any picket fences. We certainly didn't have any green lawns. It was like, who are these people? So anyway, that point I think is so fundamentally important, and we don't understand the way in which it narrows our knowledge. The other thing I just want to say briefly is that as president, I wrote a brief message to the membership about the experiences we're having with COVID-19 and injustice and discrimination. And one thing that is fascinating, I don't know how it is happening around the world, but in the US, suddenly we have politicians talking about behavioral science, talking about social connectedness and social isolation and how we should help people with that. I mean, it's really a big moment for us in the field. But I think we undersell the degree to which our science is applicable to the world we live in. It's not only an abstract, it is applicable. So in that regard, I've created a standing committee on global issues in behavioral development. And for those of you who are inspired by Kofi's talk, as I was, I invite you to send us messages about your thoughts on these issues. And Kofi, I hope you'll join us in kind of screening those issues and thinking through ways in which we can address some of them. I think we sell ourselves short by not recognizing how important our science is to everyday life. Okay, so let me just say that, let me go to a questions to check the chat questions. So one person addresses the point you raised about predatory journals and predatory conferences. And I have to say, I mean, I've been in the field a long time. I'm pretty good with predatory journals. I can recognize them because I tend to publish in the same journals. but I was this close to being sucked in by a predatory conference. And I thought about it, I looked at it and I thought, I don't know any of these people. So like, okay, I don't know any of those people, but I don't know everybody. So maybe it's just me. But then later on, they put the name of someone I did know. And I wrote to her and I said, do you know anything about these? It turns out, long story short, it was a predatory conference and it was ridiculous. So we really have to be very careful. So one of the questions is, do you have any suggestions about how to prepare an article for an international journal, but that's based on research in a specific country?
How? Actually, I was thinking it was going to be, how do you actually help people to identify predatory journals? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess that was my question. I snuck in there. I didn't mean to, but yeah.
No, that's fine. Yeah, no, that's a fundamental. It's a very important question, because at the heart of all of this, you know, part of our premises is that it's not that we're not doing good research. There's good research being done. Sometimes getting this research out is very difficult. And there are many reasons why. Among them are limitations in access, you know, to current research, for example. Now, one could say that now we have databases that international organizations are making available, but we still live in a world where sometimes what is very, very easily available to those of us who've done scholarship in the in North America and Europe, take for granted, actually not easily available. So sometimes just even preparing a paper, you need to, for a paper to make it, you know, in a significant journal, regardless of where it is, whether it's in your own country, your own continent, or elsewhere, you have to be up to date on what is happening on the topic, for example. And unless we are able to support people to really keep up to date, you're going to have situations where the papers are written beautifully, but when they get a review, the reviews are not that positive, because very often the literature may even lag behind. Right? So I think part of our mentoring role, and I know a lot of us do this, that the number of us who are constantly bringing attention to the newest work that somebody has published, ResearchGate and other sort of platforms of that nature, are making it more and more easy for us to do that. But I think that is one of the, now with that question, one of the things we need to take seriously is how to support in making available what we've been able to publish. I'm thinking of the limitation when we did the, there's one piece we did. I'm trying to remember what it was. But one of the challenges was, now having produced the volume, the issue became, how do we make it available and easily accessible to scholars in developing countries? And some of these journals are selling these papers, you know, at prices that people cannot afford. And I think in some cases, we've taken the extra step of working with the publisher to see if we'll be given permission to circulate our own copies to as many people as possible. So we need to find strategies that support our young scholars to overcome that kind of a problem.
Well, one of the last question from Ann Peterson, who says, outstanding presentation. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. She asks, what are the most important next steps? So you've begun with that. You've begun to address that somewhat. But do you have any final words you'd like to add about next steps?
Yeah. I think as I think about next steps, I really think, and I hate to use myself as a case study, but I have a habit of looking inside and seeing, what if I were the young scholar that I'm trying to support? What would I be looking for? And I think we do a good job finding resources, finding support. But I really do think if we speak closely with a lot of our young scholars, we would also find that very often they are swimming against currents, and availability of those of us who have made ourselves, you know, or have communicated an interest in helping, are able to, you know, so being available, not only intellectually, but sometimes, you know, socio-emotionally, you know, to our students. I think we are doing a good job with collaborative research that draws students, early career scholars into it. That is something we need to do more of. I think it's difficult to provide mentoring just through conversations. I mean, that is good mentoring, but how do we try to integrate more and more of the people we are mentoring into our research programs so that the research programs themselves become a vehicle, some kind of an apprenticeship model for learning research. I think that would help. There are people doing that already, but I think we could do more of that.
Yeah. Maybe
I think we need to get more and more allies, allies in the funding arena. I think a few foundations have stepped up to the plate, and we've mentioned some already. We need to look to create more allies. I'm impressed by how many private foundations are speaking to the issue of how you communicate what we know. You're all doing a lot of wonderful research that is communicated only to people like you who understand your own language. How do we get that knowledge to the right places, to policymakers, and actually to funding agencies who might need what we know to be able to fund projects that may not be research, but actually advance society. Those are all areas we need to do more work in.
Great. I completely agree. And although it's a terribly difficult time we're living in, there's also some slight indications that it might be a very special time and a time when change might be more possible than in at least recent past times.
Yes.
So, okay, well, I thank you very much. I thank you, Kofi, and all of our pandemic keynotes for giving us their expertise, sharing their expertise, and giving us something to hang on to while we're not in Rhodes. But I do hope that we will all be in Rhodes in 2022. And I look forward to seeing everyone there. And also, I look forward to ISSBD's effort to bring forward some of the kinds of ideas that you outlined, because it is one of the most international organizations that I belong to, that I know of, and it has a real commitment to sharing our science, but also mutually developing our science. And I think that's an important goal. So I thank you, Kofi. I thank you, everyone, and see you in 2022, but hopefully before. I wish you all good luck, safe and healthy times, and coming out of the difficult times that we're currently living in.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.